Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Grow Wire podcast. I'm your host, Fritz Nelson. I hope all of you have remained safe and healthy during this time. I first want to note that this podcast episode was recorded prior to COVID-19 closures and shelter in place, so our levity should be taken in that context. Everyone at Grow Wire extends our support for those impacted by coronavirus, and we continue to encourage you to visit growwire.com for advice, tools, and stories around managing business, building resilience, working from home, and any other resources you may need to get through this challenging time. Today, we welcome the founders of Morning Brew, Alex Lieberman and Austin Reef. If you're unaware of Morning Brew, it's a daily email newsletter with the most important business news of the day from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. I actually happen to be a very loyal subscriber myself, and I can say that Morning Brew always delivers the news in an informative, concise, but also witty manner. It's one of the reasons I look forward to it each day. Today we chat with Lieberman and Reef, two 20-somethings who met at the University of Michigan. We talked to them about the genesis of the newsletter in 2015, which began as really a means to helping millennial business students stay up to date on the news without having to read the Wall Street Journal front to back, something that students admittedly loathe doing. With more than 1 million subscribers and an open rate of 42%, which is like twice the industry average, and a team of almost 40 employees, the founders explained to us how they took this college side hustle and turned it into one of the top newsletters in the world, not to mention adding subsidiaries in retail and tech, as well as a podcast called Business Casual. Reef and Lieberman also dissect the current state of media as well as reader trends, revealing the keys to what they think are Morning Brew's success, no matter how the industry continues to change and evolve. You won't want to miss this one. You won't want to not subscribe to Morning Brew, Retail Brew, Emerging Tech Brew. So, coming up next.
You're listening to the Grow Wire podcast, a place where you will learn the ins and outs of growing a business, running a business, or even taking your big idea, career, or personal development to the next level. It's all possible. Our host, Fritz Nelson, the editor-in-chief of GrowWire.com, will take you on an exploration of growth through candid conversations with some of the most brilliant minds in entrepreneurship, entertainment, business development, and more. Whatever your goal, we know you'll walk away with the right tools to help fuel your journey of growth.
So how did Morning Brew get started?
A little bit of background is I come from a financial services family. Grew up in New Jersey. My dad worked in sales and trading for 20 years. My mom worked in sales and trading for 20 years. My grandpa worked in sales and trading for 20 years. And so for me, there was no other option but to work in financial services because, family's the most important thing in my life. I had no knowledge of what existed outside of what my role models did. That led me to going to the University of Michigan for college. One of the biggest reasons that I went there, it was for the business program. And so I did the very classic financial services route that most students in an undergrad business program do. I was in the business school from sophomore year to senior year, did internships after freshman, sophomore, and junior years. After my junior year internship at Morgan Stanley in sales and trading, I was given a job offer to work full time after graduating from college. And, if you looked at my whole life, that was kind of like peak in my mind, like working in sales and trading for Morgan Stanley, trading the same product that my dad traded in Times Square. Like it didn't get better than that. But then what was interesting that happened was during my senior year at Michigan, I already had my job in hand. I only had to take 2 classes my entire senior year. And so I was like, I need to do something to pass.
So you drank.
There was a little bit of drinking, a whole lot of Mario Kart and FIFA. But after about a week and a half of playing FIFA for 16 hours straight a day, I was like, I need to do something else. And so what I decided to do was help other students prepare for job interviews because a lot of people were re-recruiting during their senior year at Michigan. And so when I was helping students with recruiting, what I would do is I would do mock interviews with them. And the first question I would always ask in mock interviews was, how do you keep up with the business world? This was the first question that my dad would always ask me in prep interviews. And also my thought was like, even in a mock interview, people are going to be nervous to start. So let's give them a layup question to help them shake the nerves. But what was really interesting was every single student had the same exact response to that question. They would say, I read the Wall Street Journal and I read it because I feel like I have to, because it's a prerequisite to say I'm well read in business, but it's dense, it's dry, and I don't have enough time in my day to read the journal cover to cover. And so after hearing this a few dozen times, I was like, okay, this is crazy. These kids are working their asses off to have careers in business, yet they don't have content that story tells the business world in a fun and engaging way. So I started writing a daily business roundup. It was called Market Corner. It was a PDF that I would attach to an email every day. There was no website. If you wanted to sign up for it, you had to shoot me a text or an email saying, hey, heard about your daily roundup. Can you add me to your listserv? I would have to manually put in your email address. And that's basically what the first 3 months of like the OG Morning Brew looked like. After about 3 months of doing it, there were a few thousand people signed up for it, which to me was, again, a small number, but impressive given how much friction there was to sign up for the product. At the end of first semester of my senior year, after about, again, 3 months of doing this, Austin and I connected because Austin was an early reader of this PDF newsletter called Market Corner. We got together and he expressed his interest in what I was doing. He had a ton of invaluable feedback and he saw the opportunity that I saw to better educate and engage the future business leader. And so we ended up coming together and co-founding Morning Brew, which launched in its current form as a daily email newsletter in March of 2015. To this day, the daily newsletter is our marquee product. It has the largest audience, and it all started because of just trying something out to pass the time and someone else taking an interest in it and wanting to get involved in any way possible.
So Austin, were you similarly bored, or like what made you want to get involved with it?
Yeah, so I was definitely not bored. I was a sophomore when Alex was a senior. So I was similar to Alex on that finance path. I was interested in investment banking, but I did realize that it wasn't fulfilling everything I wanted. And so I went after my junior year to work at an investment bank. And it was that summer that Alex and I decided, so that was summer of 2016, Alex and I decided that we wanted to be entrepreneurs, we wanted to start our own company, and what better time than now when we had a product, we had an idea that we were passionate about, and we were so young that we didn't have a family or we didn't have a mortgage or anything like that to support. And so we thought, what better time than now to go out on our own and try to create something. And that's what we did. So after my senior year, I graduated and moved to New York, and Alex had previously quit his job at Morgan Stanley, and we started writing Morning Brew full time.
Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm from Baltimore, Maryland.
Gotcha. And other than having too much time on your hands, like what drew you to want to do that?
Potentially, I just wasn't creative enough, and writing a PDF was the most interesting thing to me. I think partially it was me being a little bit selfish, if I'm being honest, where I knew I was going to be working in sales and trading after school because right at that point, I didn't have a business that I was planning on quitting my lifelong dream job to go do. And so for me, this was not only a mechanism to help other students just understand the business world in a more engaging way, but also it would force myself to stay up to date with the business world, to read business news for 4 hours a day and then condense it into 75 to 150 word blurbs that would force me to stay up to date with what was happening in the world. So I think part of it was just being a little bit more practical about how this could also help myself in being prepared for starting a trading job after a full year of school, not doing classes or doing anything else mentally stimulating.
And by the way, I only read the logistics section of the Wall Street Journal from cover to cover. Just kidding. Talk about dry.
Yeah, I was going to say that is quite the accomplishment if you're able to do that every day.
I do get the newsletter though. Tells you a lot. So how does it go from this newsletter that was sent out at a college to jumping into the broader world, the world at large?
Yeah, so we can start at the beginning. So Alex sent out an email to everyone signed up, and I was one of those people. And he said, who wants to join me and build this out? I didn't really know what that meant, but I thought there was something there, and I thought we can make it better. So the first step was going from a PDF attachment to an actual email, which seems obvious now, but that was not obvious at the time. And we changed the name from Market Corner to Morning Brew for a bunch of reasons, but we didn't want it to solely be about financial markets. And so we picked a more general name called Morning Brew. We did that for 2 years or a year and a half part-time while I was a student, while Alex worked at Morgan Stanley. And then I graduated, moved to New York City, and we had one of those moments where we looked at each other and we're like, what are we doing? We have to figure this out. And so we realized very early on that while we were decent writers, fairly good, we were certainly not as good as the content we wanted to create. We had a joint vision of what that content looked like, read like, sounded like, what the voice was, but we knew we couldn't accomplish that while also running the business. So we went out, raised a bit of funding from family and friends, and then hired our first writer. And that was off to the races. And we hired our second employee was a growth product person to help grow the newsletter, because we knew early on, because we were such young founders and we were inexperienced, that we could only do one thing and do it very, very well. And so that was our goal, to be the best in the world at writing newsletters, growing newsletters, and then creating brand partnerships to sell those newsletters, to monetize, to fuel back into more writers and more growth. And that's basically the only thing we did for, say, 2.5 years until recently, was write, grow, and sell the single best newsletter we possibly could.
And so friends and family funding, if I recall in some of my research, you guys were thinking about taking on some venture money, but put that on hold. You didn't need it.
That's correct. So in 2015, if you'd have asked us, did we want to raise a bunch of venture funding, the answer would have probably been yes. But in 2017, when I graduated and we had the opportunity to do so, we realized that it wasn't the best choice for us. We didn't want to be venture-backed founders. We wanted to control our own destiny, run a profitable, cash flow positive media company. To this day, we have not raised any capital beyond that first round of funding.
So how did you grow readership in those early days? What were your secrets?
Yeah. So as Austin had mentioned, we were just relentlessly focused on this 3-step process of write, grow, sell. And in the beginning, the grow was all just organic growth strategies because, as we discussed, we didn't have the money yet to pay for growth. And so what we relied on were a few things. One was cross promotions with other newsletters. This is generally, I think, a marketing practice that has proved to be effective, where if you do cross promotions with like channel partners, as in Morning Brew is an email cross-promoting with other email newsletters, podcast cross-promoting with other podcasts. It's one layer of behavioral change that you don't have to worry about, because you're getting someone who already has the behavior of reading email newsletters to sign up for another email newsletter, rather than trying to train someone to read email if they haven't done that previously. So one was cross-promotions. The second was an ambassador program. Basically, early on, we said, how can we mobilize the college students across the country that love what we're doing and incentivize them through different rewards, whether it be Morning Brew swag, money, whether it be time with Austin and I to get career advice. And we basically tried every potential incentive under the sun. But the ambassador program in the early days of Morning Brew was a massive driver of growth. And then the third was our referral program. And our referral program to this day is a massive user acquisition strategy that we use. Over 250,000 readers have gotten at least one referral. And that is simply from creating this very simple flow of, you sign up for Morning Brew. When you sign up for Morning Brew, you have a unique link that's created that enables you to share the brew with other people. If you share the brew with other people and they sign up through your unique link, you start getting credit for that. And at certain checkpoints of number of referrals, you earn things ranging from content that other readers don't have access to, like our Sunday newsletter, to swag, like our mugs, our bottle openers, and our t-shirts. And then we also have like an insider Facebook group that only if you've gone to a certain number of referrals do you have access to. So in the early days, it was simply just relentlessly deploying those strategies and just simple like guerrilla marketing strategies, going into every single class at Michigan, standing up in front of classes for a minute and a half, telling the Morning Brew story, passing around a sheet of paper, telling people to write down their email address, after class typing those email addresses into our website manually, and doing that over and over and over. That was how we grew in the beginning. To your original question about how did we end up growing so exponentially, it was a function of getting our audience to a point where it was large enough to be able to pitch to advertisers. Advertisers started paying to have their story told in our voice in our newsletter to build affinity with our audience, then taking that money and reinvesting it either into new hires, or the second thing was into paid marketing. Once we started spending money on paid marketing, ranging from Facebook ads and Instagram ads to buying ads in other email newsletters, that is really where we poured the fuel on the fire to grow our audience exponentially.
Can we talk about demographics a little bit? I know you guys are kind of really dialed into this. I think I read the average age 28, 55% male, pretty much coastal, income of $100,000. Maybe that's changed. Is that?
Yeah, that's definitely the right demographic, but we like to think of our audience as more of a psychographic. So we like to think of our audience as the intellectually curious, upwardly mobile person who, maybe they do fit those demographics, or maybe there's someone who is the CEO of a company who is reading Morning Brew not because it is the deepest dives they'll read that day, but because they also want a conversational, witty way to start their day. And so that's how we like to view it, is more of the mindset of these people, what they do, not as much who they are from a demographic standpoint.
You have a pretty amazing open rate too. What is that running at about right now?
So our daily newsletters unique open rate sits around 42%. Just for context, the average daily newsletter is somewhere in the ballpark of 20 to 25%. So it depends on the newsletters that you're comparing us to, but it's something close to 2x the industry average. And I think we've been able to do that because we've been focused on a few key things. One is building habit with an audience. People, I don't think, put enough emphasis on the value in creating habit, where something simply just subconsciously becomes part of your morning routine. Like, we have taken 5 minutes of like the most valuable mental real estate for such a valuable audience, where in the morning, whether it's before you brush your teeth or after you get on the train, before you start doing your most productive work of the day, you are coming back to us every day to help inform the decisions you're making and the conversations you're having. And we can't discredit just how important that is. I have no data to prove it, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did a 2-day-a-week newsletter. The open rate would likely be significantly impacted because this idea of making something habitual would be way harder to do. So one is creating habit. The other is we are relentless about our churning practices. And one, when we focus on user acquisition, whether it's through paid channels or unpaid channels, the way we assess marketing channels is by the cost of getting a high quality subscriber. So not just any new email address, but an email address that opens at a certain open rate that we are looking for. But then the second piece of it is we are very closely monitoring our list on a daily and weekly basis. And when subscribers get to a certain point of not engaging with the newsletter, meaning opening the newsletter, they will have the ability to basically opt back into the newsletter, showing us that they actually want to read it and care to read it. And if they don't do that, they'll be scrubbed from the list, because at the end of the day, all that happens is, one, people are continuing to get a newsletter that they don't want to get since they haven't opened it a lot and they did not back in. But also in terms of email deliverability, which we're getting really into like the weeds of email practice, the more unengaged people you keep on your list, the more that actually your great readers are impacted, because our email being delivered into their inboxes can actually be affected.
Interesting. I want to dive into that, but real quick, my understanding just from reading is there's some So on revenue growth, you finished 2019 with 13 million in revenue.
Yep, that's correct.
And at the end of 2019, or maybe right around now, well, I thought it was 33, but I just heard out in the lobby 45. You have 45 people?
So, no, we have about 37, 38 people.
Let's talk about the business model a little bit first. So you alluded to ads in the newsletter, but also that they're written in the Morning Brew or the Brew voice. So your own people write those ads.
Yeah, so that's our whole value prop of our brand partnerships team. And we call it brand partnerships because we truly view it as a partnership. It's not a banner or a Google ad that follows you around the internet, but it is something that we take the message that you want to try to convey, but we put that in our voice, our tone, and integrate that into the newsletter. And that way people have this idea that you see a banner ad, you kind of ignore it, but this is so engaging, and people tweet out our ads all the time. They're very funny. We've had some really great ads in the past, and so they're actually just as engaging as the content itself. And so if you want people to resonate with whatever your messaging points are, we give you the ability to do that by working with us and creating that partnership.
And you only charge advertisers for opens?
So we've gone through a few different advertising models, but yeah, we view everything in terms of all we care about as a business is opens of the newsletter. So subscribers of the newsletter for us is less important. Subscribers certainly gets headlines, but to Alex's point before about churning, what we're more focused on internally is ensuring that people are engaging with the newsletter constantly. And the way we do that is by keeping the list as engaged as possible, keeping that open rate up. And that's our North Star. So, the subscriber numbers get headlines, but for us, engagement and success is all dictated by daily opens of the newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, the world has changed. I used to run print magazines. There was actually a thing where they printed on paper, which is like derived from trees.
I've never heard of those things.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about those?
Don't believe it.
But we used to talk about readership, but it was really about receivership, right? We had no way to measure if somebody read something. Then the internet came along and you could measure what people were looking at. And newsletters, it's kind of back to receivership, but you can measure whether somebody opened it.
And I think there's an interesting point in what you said, which is the internet created a ton of things, but it still took brands, both on like the brand side, but also media brands, a long period of time to kind of recalibrate to what true engagement meant, where there was this period of the internet where creating as much content as humanly possible to generate impressions, which no one knew what that meant other than some eyeball maybe potentially probably touched a corner of your page for a second, actually was given value that brands valued and would pay for. And it almost felt like with the internet, there was a period of time for people to recalibrate what truly mattered. Even in the world of email, for the longest time, we saw that brands were thinking about email newsletter buys, talking about it in terms of subscribers. But to your point about receivership, just because we've delivered a newsletter to 2 million inboxes means nothing about a reader's engagement with both our content, but also the content that a brand has paid for us to put in our newsletter. And so I think a lot of it is just like an education and kind of like this progression back to reality of like what actually matters, and not being distracted just by large numbers that people like to throw around.
America's ready to get back to work, but to win in the new economy, you need NetSuite by Oracle, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you visibility and control over your financials, HR, inventory, e-commerce, and more, all in one place. NetSuite surveyed hundreds of business leaders and assembled a playbook of the top strategies they're using as America reopens for business. Receive your free guide, 7 actions businesses need to take now, and schedule your free product tour at netsuite.com/open. netsuite.com/open.
Are you guys profitable?
Yes. So that's how we fund the business, is through profits.
Gotcha. So let's talk about some of the other things. So Morning Brew was the sort of beginning of it, but now there's Retail Brew and Emerging Tech Brew. There's I thought this was really clever of you guys, a pop-up called Turnout around the elections and voting. I imagine for other events you might have, quote, pop-up newsletters, and the podcast Business Casual, which is only a few months old.
Yeah, a couple months now.
Okay. So I just want to go back to Retail Brew and Emerging Tech Brew. What do you need to see in order to start those? Like, is there, are there metrics that you see that say, okay, I think we could start something here?
So there are a few things. In general, end of 2018, we took a step back and we saw that the flywheel of write, grow, sell was really starting to work for Morning Brew. And we saw revenue begin to rise, profits begin to rise. And so we wanted to understand what's coming next. And so we thought of two things, one of which being podcasts, which we can get into in a second, and the other creating other newsletters. And the idea to create other newsletters came from a few different data points. One, we would get inbound emails all the time. Well, so that's like the beauty behind email, is that there's a reply button. So you can have a pretty intimate relationship with people. And we get replies all the time saying, hey, I work in retail, I work in tech, I work in marketing. I love Morning Brew. I wish I had Morning Brew for X, for marketing, for retail. And after we heard that enough times, we started to think about what would it mean to create a Morning Brew for the retail industry. And we thought the opportunity was interesting. So then we looked at, well, just in general, going more niche, what do we need to see to go into a vertical? And it's a matrix of a lot of different things. Is there enough content to cover? We don't want to go into a vertical where there's only 1 day's worth of content. That's not that exciting for us. There has to be a lot of content to cover. 2, is there enough people who work or are interested in that vertical for us to grow a large subscriber base? We understand Retail Brew is never going to be the same size as Morning Brew, but we care more about the right people reading Retail Brew, people who work in or are directly affected by the retail industry. And so we need to make sure there was enough people in that industry. And then lastly, what's the advertiser pool look like? Given our business model is ads or selling ads, we want to make sure that there are enough companies who are willing to pay a premium to get in front of retail professionals. And if it checks those 3 boxes, and there's a few other things, but those are the big 3. Obviously, we need to find a writer as well, which is challenging. Our writers are incredibly talented, and they have a really unique skill set. So let's call it those 4. If we have those 4 things, we'll look to launching a new vertical. And so we launched retail, emerging tech, and then obviously went into audio with our podcast, Business Casual.
So what made you want to start Business Casual, the podcast?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. One is, as we looked at our business and we started to reach a point of some level of maturity with Morning Brew, we asked ourselves, what are the largest risks to the business? And a few of those risks included monetization risk. How do we de-risk the business from just being dependent on advertising revenue and only being dependent on advertising revenue on one distribution channel? The other is platform risk, meaning we are an email company, and while we like to think that our dependency on email clients is a better dependency than being a social first media company dependent on Facebook or Instagram, there is still inherently a gatekeeper between our business and our consumer, which are the email clients, whether it be Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, etc. And so as we start to think about being in just kind of the next chapter of the business and going from a newsletter business to a portfolio of media assets, we really thought hard about how can we diversify ourselves in different ways. The industry newsletters like Retail Brew or Emerging Tech Brew, for us, were the first step in diversification of advertising revenue. So before diversifying outside of advertising revenue, whether it be into subscription revenue, B2B revenue, advertising revenue itself can be diversified, both in terms of the type of client and also how many assets you are advertising on. Because the way we always back into thinking about diversification is, if a recession was to happen tomorrow, how would the purchasing habits of the end buyer change? And for us, the perfect advertiser in retail brew, getting in front of a retail professional, making a B2B decision for their company, the marketer who wants to get in front of that person is going to react very differently to an economic downturn than would the large brand advertiser that's trying to get in front of our 2 million readers to drive brand awareness. So that is what the industry newsletter started to do for us. But on the platform risk side, we said, how can we continue to build a really intimate relationship with our audience, but do so in a way that isn't through email, given we want to hedge that risk? And there were a few places that we thought about going, but our view of the medium where there was the most opportunity, yet it was mature enough that we potentially weren't too early to the party, was podcasting. And we'd also, as Austin had alluded to, the best way for us to solicit feedback is through people hitting reply and responding to our email. And we had constantly gotten feedback from readers saying, when are you coming out with some form of audio, whether it be literally an exact replica of the newsletter just read to you, or whether it be a different product. What we ended up deciding was having the newsletter read to you had kind of like second order effects of downside in doing that. But for us, we thought that audio was another competency we wanted to build. It was a way we could build a really intimate relationship with our consumer. It was a medium through which we thought our existing advertiser had appetite in buying ads. And so once we knew we wanted to launch a podcast, then two extremely talented people in our business who were not full-time podcast people at all just kind of pulled this thing together. Now that we're starting to see a lot of momentum in terms of downloads and advertiser interest, we've actually made full-time hires dedicated to the audio part of our business.
Yeah, and I really enjoy it. It's quite good. I want to ask about your hiring practices, because there are a lot of newsletters out there. And what I mean, though, really, because all publications have their own newsletters, but independent newsletters, the thing that hooked me in addition to covering the things that mattered to me, was the voice, which is a really hard thing to get. And I'm not going to name some of the others out there, but they are just slightly missing. But on Morning Brew, and it may just be my sense of humor, I always just get this little chuckle about something that's written. And that's really hard to do, and it's hard to find people to do it. How do you guys approach hiring from that standpoint?
Yeah, hiring editorial people is the hardest thing I think we have to do. It's just, what's the hire rate on someone in editorial? It's like 1 in 100 or something. We interview so many people, and we interview talented people who, they may be great retail reporters, but they can't hit our tone. And so we are looking, like, let's take retail, for example, and Haley LaSavage, who's our retail writer. We're looking for the intersection of someone who is knowledgeable about the business world, can write in a witty tone, but then also understands the retail world. That's incredibly hard. And so for us, there's no magic in doing this. You just have to go out and find the people and make sure that they can hit on those three things. In terms of voice, I have to give all the credit to our managing editor. We certainly had a vision, but our managing editor, Neil Fryman, is incredibly talented. And he has been, for the last 2.5 years, I think, he has been the voice behind all of the voices. So he's been the one who has crafted the voice and tweaked it and made it perfect for Morning Brew. And then he's the one who sets the tone and the example for Retail Brew, for Emerging Tech Brew, even for the podcast. It still has tone and a voice. And so it really goes back to making sure Morning Brew is perfect, and then we could begin to expand out. And each vertical, they have their own little flair. So Haley has a different style than Ryan, and that's different than Morning Brew, but it has the same principles across all of them. And that's what makes all of our content and all our editorial flow and allows us to scale outward and we continue to do so. So we're really excited about this opportunity to continue to find extremely talented people and go into new verticals.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a fine line between being glib, because some of the topics are very serious, right? Being engaging in that tone of voice. I also want to ask about some of the other elements. You have you talked about the referrals and pass along contests, but you have quizzes. You have now a new little mini. I guess you named it something different than a crossword, because technically it wasn't a crossword. But all of these things are more chances to engage with readers. How are those going? How do you come up with those ideas?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because while on one side, email is an amazing platform for having an intimate connection with an audience and truly owning the relationship. On the other hand, there are limitations to email because in some respects it is a very antiquated technology. One of the examples of that is just in terms of data. A big goal for our business over the next year is to get smarter about our readers' behaviors so that making content decisions are not purely a shooting from the hip exercise, but there's actually a little bit of method to the madness. What I will say is, as a curation business where our job is to cut through the noise and tell our specific audience what they should be reading about, there's always going to be a human element to that. It's always going to be an art, but we do see a lot of opportunity to test new things in the newsletter. And rather than just say, we think people like that, we think a lot of people emailed us in, okay, what does the data actually say in terms of how people resonated with this content? Okay, if people resonated really well, let's actually talk to some of those people that engaged with it and get their perspective on how we can push whatever this type of content is, whether it's the not a crossword or whether it's the quiz. How can we take that to the next level? So to your question, a lot of the ways we make decisions and testing things, especially below the fold in the newsletter where it's more lifestyle-y and less newsy, is using ourselves, our team, and the people, especially on editorial, as like the best use case for who our reader is, and then are extrapolating ourselves to our audience. And generally, I think that instinct has done well, where if we think we are going to enjoy writing about something or reading about something, our audience generally enjoys it. But over time, we also want to become more data smart about making some content decisions.
I want to close out here by talking about the media industry, because I've been a long-time watcher of the media industry and all the trends that happen. And we talked about the impact of the internet a little bit ago. And one of the things the internet did was kind of level the playing field, so to speak, on who could be a media company. And I think on the good side, it gave rise to companies like Morning Brew. On the bad side, it makes it hard for people to decide who to trust. And for media companies, it's made it harder and harder to make money. Most media companies, established media companies, have had a hard time making money. And so they go chase business models. So now we have platforms like Morning Brew. We have paid subscription models like The Athletic, The Information. We have people chasing video, chasing whatever the trend is, but it's sort of like flailing to find where the money is, right? Where do you guys, and social as a whole nother, aspect to it, where do you guys see the media industry being younger, kind of getting into this from like maybe a side door, not having any of the history of seeing this all evolve? How do you guys read the industry? Where do you think it's going? Do you even care?
Well, we certainly care because it's our business and our livelihood. So yes, we care. That's a very big question. So I'll tackle it the best I can. I think first, a lot of these legacy media companies resisted the shift online and the shift to going from print to digital. And so those businesses struggled and they're constantly playing catch up. So that's the legacy publishers or some of the magazine publishers who really struggled. You see them being split up and sold off into pieces. And so that's that category. I think there's another category that actually have great businesses, just really bad cap tables. I think that's really unfortunate. There's a big category of companies out there who they're doing $100 million in revenue, 20, 30, 40, 50 million, whatever it may be, but they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars at $1 billion valuation. And so they're forced to not stay focused, but instead forced to chase the next big thing, try to act like a tech company, try to build tech products. So many media companies now are trying to build technology products, and that is so incredibly hard. And so our fundamental belief since 2017 has been venture capital and media don't mix. Now, I'm saying that in an absolute way, but it's not absolute. I think there are companies out there where it actually makes sense, but those are the exception, not the rule. And so for us, it's been, if we can control our destiny, own what we do, we don't have to chase what's next because we are setting our own expectations. So we set our annual goals, we set our profit goals, our revenue targets. And so we don't have to go chase the pivot to video or whatever it may be because we don't have investors saying, hey, you have to go do this because we have to sell for $1 billion. We want to create venture returns without venture funding. And to do that, it's going to take a longer time horizon. But I think in general, what we've seen is some of the more successful media companies have had a longer time horizon to raising big rounds of funding, at least the ones that have been successful. And so you look at The Infatuation, or you look at Food 52, they raised capital, but they took a decade, 8 years to build up that brand. And only now do they take big rounds of funding to go out and create the world's largest food festival or create the next, let's say, Bed Bath & Beyond or whatever it may be. It's more food stuff, but cooking equipment. But I think that's what we're most focused on. That's where we see it going is I think the people who have overcapitalized are going to have trouble, and we'll see what happens. There was some M&A last year, and I think that's not going to solve things long term. But for us, we don't view ourselves as gapped into that. We are or grouped into that. We are very much so on our own path. We control our destiny. We're only going to target things that we think actually make sense. And our goal, people think because we haven't raised venture funding, our goal is not to create a massive company. No, it is, but we're going to do it our way on our terms, and we're not going to take gambles that don't make sense simply because venture capitalists tell us to do so.
And just a few follow-up thoughts on that. So because I think in pictures, and I think Austin really clearly articulated kind of our thought on just the venture model. I think our view along the way, without saying it in this way, and this is like the cheesiest way to say it, is like we would rather be, if we had the choice to be captains of a pirate ship or passengers on a cruise ship, we'd pick the pirate ship every single day. Cruise ships get broken up by icebergs and sink. Pirate ships, you can move quicker and you actually are steering them. We like that model better. And then on the other side, we believe deeply in the value of curation. We weren't so thoughtful and scientific in becoming a curator when we started the business. We became a curator because we didn't have the money or the know-how to have a newsroom. So there wasn't much of a choice. But we live in an age, as you were saying, that we are truly in an attention economy where the internet has given people the ability to create content wherever and whenever they want, which means that the proliferation of content is greater than ever, and it's only increasing every day. And so the need for services or people to cut through the noise and tell you what to trust and care about is more important than ever. We have ridden that wave, even though, again, we weren't really formulaic in that. We have benefited from that trend where focusing people is a utility that people actually will either pay with their time or their money.
And just one follow-up on that is if you had a choice of creating some super premium product that you could charge people money for, which isn't in your current business model plans that I know of, or just because we were just talking about it, the next newsletter around food, which would it be?
The fortunate thing is that we have the ability to do both, and we will. So we are certainly focused on creating the next newsletter, and we have one planned that'll be launching the next couple of months, and I couldn't be more excited for it. But we're also working on what is that product that we can get people to pay us for, not because they like Morning Brew, but because it is out of their self-interest. And that's our goal is how can we add value to our readers' lives? And it goes back to the psychographic thing, understanding who our readers are, not what their age is or where they live, as much as what are their habits. And once we tap into that, we believe we can do both. We can create a diversified revenue company that has a ton of verticals that we will send you an email in the morning giving you general business news. We'll send you an email at 10 o'clock with news and interesting stories on whatever industry you work in. And then later in your day or whenever, we will serve you with a product that you actually pay for because it is enhancing your life in a significant way.
Okay, we're going to go rapid fire here to close out. I got 10 questions. This is not like the wheel.
Sounds good.
All
Glad
right.
you know the wheel.
As part of the Business Casual podcast. Some of these will be quick and easy. Some of them maybe not.
And should we switch back and forth?
You can, however you want to do it.
Sounds good.
How many, this one's obvious, but how many companies have you founded or co-founded?
This is the only one.
How long from idea to your first 500,000 in revenue?
2.5 years.
How many significant failures, defined as running out or close to running out of money, no customers, product didn't work, somebody else got there first, critical employee left, did you have in your first 2 years?
0, but I don't think that's a good thing.
Good answer. How many distinct pivots, like major changes to target audience or market, product, business model, did your business make before settling on its current mission?
1 or 2.
How long from idea to your realization that this was going to be a business that would take off?
1.5 years. So from 2015, when we launched the newsletter, to let's call it end of 2016, when we actually decided to make it our livelihood.
I'm going to give you a list of choices and you can choose 2 or 3. What were your biggest challenges once you realized your business was going to take off? Raising money, hiring, getting the product ready, finding customers, understanding how to scale, managing cash flow, developing a sales team, developing the rest of the company, finance, HR, and then finally operational efficiency.
It's all hiring. It all comes back to hiring because you need people to do all those things.
Pick 2 or 3 of the following factors. Well, you've kind of just answered this, to getting it right. Great product concept, building the right culture, hiring the best people, building the company, understanding how to scale, developing a marketing message, developing post-sale support, ensuring great customer experience.
I wasn't smart enough to remember all of the things you just said. So I'm going to say the one that I remember that resonated with me, which is hiring. Hiring when you already have product market fit. If you don't have product market fit yet, as in you're trying to launch a new product, then I would say the product is more important, because it doesn't matter the people you bring on if you don't actually have a product that people care about. So I would say it's product market fit, then hiring, product market fit, then hiring.
What singular advantage did you have in launching this business?
Doing it while we were in college, so the risk was mitigated significantly, and the resources of our university that allowed for us to pay for things but not using our pockets.
What surprises you most about your company today versus what you envisioned when you created your initial business plan?
Never thought we'd be sitting in an office with 38 people and about to be moving into a new headquarters with seats for up to 100.
Last one. Contrast what success or business goal metric-wise look like when you started, like when you really thought, oh man, this could be a business, to what it looks like now?
So when we originally started, I would say it was a more singular view of making a lot of money. And now I would say it is a more holistic view of the world and what success means. And the criteria are building a team, creating significant value to a large number of people, having the opportunity to speak with incredibly smart people that we should have no business being able to speak with, not having to worry about money again, and being in control of our destiny.
Excellent. Well, anybody who is listening to this podcast should read any and all of the brews and listen to Business Casual. Thank you guys so much and good luck.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I love that outlook. These guys are in total control of their destiny. They know where they're going. They know how fast to get there. And you are too. What will you do with it? Thank you so much to Morning Brew founders Alex Lieberman and Austin Reef for joining us on this episode of the Grow Wire podcast. I also want to thank our wonderful editors over at Lampstand, as well as our producer, Kendall Fisher.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you, as always, for tuning in. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe.
Adios. You just listened to the Grow Wire podcast with host Fritz Nelson. Make sure to keep tuning in for more episodes full of tips, tools, stories, and strategies to help take your personal and professional growth to the next level. Until next time.